Welcome everybody to this, our fourth session of our virtual trade mission with Canada. We're excited for this breakout session focusing on supply chains. For those who are joining us for the first time today, be sure you go check out the other sessions if they are relevant to you. The first session was a market overview provided by our friends at the Canadian Consulate General, as well as Invest Canada and across Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. The second session focused on the life science industry. The third session on advanced manufacturing, and that brings us to supply chain now. At 3 o'clock today, we'll do our concluding session on technology and entrepreneurship. As I looked at the registration list for this session, there actually was quite a bit of overlap with tech and entrepreneurship, and so I encourage anybody that would find that relevant to stick around for that for the fifth session. But we're very excited right now for the opportunity to hear from some really great experts in Canada on supply chains and to have a discussion. At the outset, I'd like to go ahead and recognize our partners at the Consulate General in Denver, here in Utah, the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce and the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and of course, Toronto Global, Vancouver Economic Commission, and Montreal International, who've worked hard to line up a great a lineup of speakers for us today. You know, at the outset, I just like to recognize Paul Campbell, who is here in Utah. He's the honorary consul of Canada in Utah. He's also a business leader, a great friend of the World Trade Center and mine personally. So, Paul, we're grateful for your willingness to moderate our panel discussion. I'd also like to recognize Courtney Ray. She leads World Trade Center Utah's international programming. She is the one, for any companies who are just joining us now and haven't heard from Courtney in other sessions, Courtney is the one to follow up with. We want to make sure that we help leverage the partnerships and the conversations that we're having today to help Utah companies grow and expand in Canada. And Courtney can be the one to connect with everybody you need to connect with. I apologize for the background noise. We're remodeling our World Trade Center here in Salt Lake City, and so we have a lot of loud feedback and banging as they do some demolition work directly beneath my office. So hopefully you can, not too distracting now, I'll be sure to put things on mute. As we jump into the program, we'll have an opportunity to have a national industry overview. Irene Sterian will provide that for us, after which we'll have a panel from 3 industry experts, one in Toronto, one in Vancouver, and one in Montreal. And Paul Campbell will go ahead and moderate that for us and introduce those speakers at that time. Without further ado, I'm honored to introduce Irene to everybody. Irene is the president and CEO of REMAP, which stands for the Refined Manufacturing Acceleration Process. REMAP is a technology accelerator that focuses on creating supply chains. So we'll have an opportunity to hear a little bit more about what REMAP does. But Irene is a leader, not only at REMAP, but in this space, in the sector, in many different areas. So I'll go ahead and go over Irene's biography, because I think it's critical for all of us to have an understanding of the depth of her expertise here in Canada on several areas, including supply chains. So as a strategic technology leader with over 30 years of experience in electronics, Irene has an entrepreneurial spirit and is a driving force in the future of manufacturing in Canada. Irene presents significant accomplishments in engineering management and pioneered environmentally safe, sustainable manufacturing technologies. Irene is a professional engineer in Ontario and holds a patent in high-density, high-performance memory circuit packaging. As a successful engineering executive, Irene has demonstrated incredible creative vision with the ability to forge successful large-scale cross-sector partnerships. Her work has resulted in unprecedented investments in Canadian commercial R&D in electronics manufacturing. These investments support startups and small to medium enterprises in the healthcare, energy, ICT, and aerospace sectors. Irene continues to give back to the engineering community as a regular contributor to global manufacturing standards at international associations through several board membership and steering committee appointments, including Canada's first advanced manufacturing supercluster, NGen Canada. As a frequent industry expert and conference speaker, Irene co-hosted the 2018 Ontario Economic Forum and was a Canada 2020 Future of Work panelist. Irene delivers smart manufacturing for connected world seminars and workshops from coast to coast to increase the adoption of Industry 4.0 in Canada, a strategy for Canadian businesses to navigate the digital economy, accelerate growth, and increase global competitiveness. So Irene, thank you very much for spending time with us today. We're very grateful. We look forward to hearing from you. And with that introduction, I'll go ahead and pass the baton over to you, Irene.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. I think the only thing you don't know about me is that I have a cat. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Yep, looks great to me.
Yeah, okay, great. So I wanted to talk a bit about the supply chains in Canada and how we really focused a lot on the US. And a lot of what we do in terms of our supply chain development is between Canada and the US. So I had 3 comments that I wanted to make here. Is number one is that we do have clusters more north-south than we have east-west. So we have more clusters around the US-Canada border around different things such as automotive and aerospace than we have across Canada. The second thing is that COVID actually has had a negative impact on our supply chains outside of North America. But if anything, I think it's strengthened our supply chains inside North America. So a lot of times Canada is a place where you can design, prototype, low volume production. And then once the product is stabilized, it would go to a low cost geography. And I think with the recent supply chain disruptions, what is actually happening is we're focusing a lot more on automation and the cost-effective manufacturing in Canada now, especially in the last 6 months, than we have been in the past. And a lot of products are not leaving for high volume. So we're looking at how to be more competitive in manufacturing and in supply chains here in Canada. And the last thing is, I think there's a huge opportunity between leveraging the strength of our existing clusters between Canada and the US and creating a stronger supply chain between the 2 countries as a circular economy, starting with design, manufacturing, and then going all the way to the end of recycling and repurposing the product. One example of one of those north-south clusters I mentioned is an automotive one between Ottawa, Canada's capital, and Detroit. And there's a lot of companies around the automotive ecosystem here, but there's also tech companies around AI, autonomous driving, sensors, LiDAR, such as LiDAR-Tech that presented in the previous presentation. And there's a huge opportunity here to reinvent the automotive supply chain. Another example is between Quebec and the states of New York and Vermont. And in here, it's electronics and microelectronics. And a lot of the packaging for new data centers, such as optics and photonics, are in this area. So northeastern United States and Canada. And again, there's huge opportunity here to strengthen those supply chains, especially as we need more data centers and more data processing as more of us are working remote. So I see 3 opportunities. First of all, in healthcare, as COVID-19 has required us that we do more internal manufacturing of PPE and ventilators. The second one is in automotive, which is really being electronified. And the idea of building hybrid engines, building sensors for cars, and doing that in this economy. And last is the agri-food section. Again, it's being reinvented in terms of the kind of food that we are producing, such as different protein sources, but also the kind of farming that we're doing, which is electronified, which is autonomous, which is using drones right now. So those 3 I see as huge opportunities. From a disruptor point of view, I think the aerospace industry has really been disrupted initially from the MAX 8 issues, but now because of COVID-19. So there's probably a surplus of aerospace inventory right now. But I think there's opportunity there in terms of developing new technologies for sanitization and for flying and for composite materials. So it may take longer to recover. So that's why I think the first 3 are immediate opportunities. And then I also see digitization and innovation in terms of the supply chains. And I would say the picture on the center there is that your typical linear supply chain with suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, and consumers. But the new supply chains are really exponential and they're networked. And suppliers are part of this digital enterprise. There's a lot of decisions between, are you going to make something or are you going to buy it because of 3D printing and because of the speed at which we can prototype now. There's a lot more supplier partnership in terms of research and development. And there's leveraging of AI and machine learning in supply chain enterprises and in the supply chain network. One example of that innovation between industry and government is this industry partner called Plug and Play. They're out of Silicon Valley, but they just announced in June that they're going to be locating one of their new locations in Toronto and working with the chemical company BASF here, but it's around supply chain transformation. Another example, which a couple of other presenters mentioned, are the superclusters, which is really a government initiative to try to connect the dots because we are geographically so far away from each other. But this one is Scale AI. It is physically located out of Montreal, but it's a $250 million cluster around applying AI technology to supply chains and building a much more robust supply chains. And so that is, again, a very exciting area where looking at how to reinvent, I would say, a very standard technology into applying tech to it and applying machine learning and AI. And lastly, I just wanted to mention a company, Tealbook, which is really just focusing on supply chains. They're a young company based out of Toronto, but what they're doing is they're using existing platforms that exist for supply chain, but they have 400 million suppliers in their database. And they're looking at keeping this information very much up to date and helping create new supply chains as we look for a first source, second source, and third source in some cases, and as we look for a COVID-19 resilience in our supply chains. So they offered their platform and their database for free because of COVID-19, and companies like Brooks Brothers, GM, and the city of Tampa have used this resource and this company to strengthen their supply chains. And with that, I would say thank you very much for listening, and I have more comments about Toronto later.
Great, thank you so much, Irene. This is Courtney Ray from World Trade Center, Utah, and I'm now going to focus on introducing our first panelist from Montreal. Her name is Jenny Hui, and she is from Element AI. She's a director there in the Global Customer Engagement Solutions Group. Jenny leads this team in building strategic plan development models to deliver AI and ML products and solutions for growing enterprise markets looking to integrate AI solutions into their supply chain, manufacturing, finance, and retail sectors. Ms. Hui holds an MBA degree from the Ivy Business School at Western University. Jenny, go ahead.
Thanks, Courtney, and thanks, Irene. And thank you, everyone on the line. I know it's been a real long day for some of you who have participated in previous sessions, so appreciate you staying online and continuing on with the day. I promise to keep this presentation as lightweight as possible. I know it's been intense, and more than happy to follow up with any questions should you have any. As Courtney mentioned, with a company called Element AI, and what we do is we develop AI-powered solutions and products that help people and machines work smarter and together for enterprises. The company itself was founded in Montreal about 4 years ago by a group of serial entrepreneurs and a world-renowned AI researcher. I'll get into the specifics about how Montreal has become a hotbed for AI in a little bit. I've been with the company for just under 3 years now, and it's been quite a bit of journey since I've started. But our founders came together with basically a shared vision to take cutting edge AI that was happening in academic labs, and then being able to translate that into AI solutions and products for business. Consumer applications of AI have had a little bit of a leg up so far, for example, chatbots and recommendation engines, but enterprise AI is largely untapped, and we think that there's a wide open opportunity, and it's a relatively immature market, even though we've been in here for about 4 years. We have over 300 employees across the world in hubs in Korea, Singapore, London, Toronto, and our head office is in Montreal. And most of our folks are spread out across product development and applied and fundamental AI research. We work with large enterprises in 2 primary industries. financial services and insurance, which is the first one. And then the second one is around supply chain, and many of them we would count within the Fortune 2000 list of companies. And so as Courtney mentioned, I work with a multidisciplinary team that includes applied AI research scientists, software developers, sector subject matter experts. And basically what we do is we sit down with clients, we try to understand their problems and requirements, and we try to put together AI products and solutions that help to solve some of those needs. Now, in supply chain in particular, I thought what would make sense is if I got into a specific use case, just to give you all a sense of what it is that we're doing with some of the work and some of the customers that we have in supply chain. And so one of our customers is a leading robotics company and specifically focusing on computer vision. And they work with many large retailers in North America. And basically what they do is they provide robotic barcode scanning that helps to read shelf tags that basically help to improve inventory management and shelf replenishment within the store and also within distribution centers as well. This is also interesting data that can then be routed back upstream to provide additional insights, to provide more accuracy around SKU forecasting as well. But essentially this company came to us with a very specific problem initially. They really needed some help to augment their OCR, which stands for Optical Character Recognition Model. And they wanted to improve the accuracy at which this AI model was reading these shelf tags so that they could correctly be classified and have that data transmitted back to alert some of the demand planners of potential out of stocks, either at distribution centers or on the shelves themselves. We've done a fairly good enough job with this particular customer such that we ended up rolling out this OCR model to about 500 plus stores of one of their major customers. And so we call that a huge success. So much so that we're continuing to work with this partner to help improve and to augment the model. This is really much a partnership with their internal data science team, and what they've come to us for specifically is to take advantage of some of the fundamental and the applied research that we're doing within our company. And so unfortunately, you may have seen in the agenda, Anand Mehtapalia was supposed to join as well as a supply chain expert. He wasn't able to make it today, but he did leave me with a few things to share based on what we're hearing with our retail customers. So I don't think this is new news, but a lot of what our customers in supply chain are saying is that they've seen roughly 3 years of their projected e-commerce transactions basically compressed in the past 6 months. And so when you really think about that, that's quite dramatic. You know, what we had thought was there was going to be some more focus on some of the more sexier problems that AI had been anticipated to help solve. But in fact, it's been the opposite. Our customers are coming back to us and saying, you know what, we don't want to do the latest and greatest things like predicting the next food and fashion trend or developing models that can come up with regenerative supply chains. What we want to do is basically use AI to help solve very basic, boring problems and opportunities. Just like the example that I just spoke to you about using a basic AI model to help read shelf tags. And so I'm going to share with you, Hannah, basically an infographic that we just released today, and I thought it was quite timely that we released it today. But it basically walks through the type of work and the type of methodology we have to help improve supply chain resiliency and shelf resiliency. And so Hannah, I'll send it over to you so that can be shared with the broader group. And it basically gives you all a snapshot of the different types of projects and activities that we're working with in our customers and supply chain. So a little bit more about Montreal and how we became an AI powerhouse, and really Canada overall. I can't give Montreal the full credit for, but really Canada is leading the way when it comes to AI expertise. And there have been several factors that have really helped to raise the country's profile in terms of expertise across the global phase. I know folks before have spoken a little bit about the type of investment and funding landscape in addition to government support. I think Irene mentioned scale.ai, so I won't go into that. But I'll speak a little bit more about the research institutions and the AI labs that have been set up here. As I mentioned earlier, one of our founders is a world-renowned AI expert. It certainly helps that we've got a co-founder that's one of the considered to be godfathers of AI, Dr. Yoshua Bengio, who was a recipient of the Turing Award back in 2019. He's also chairing the Montreal Institute for Learning Algorithms and runs the research program there, where we've been basically using and working with them, quite frankly, and tapping into the talent base there. And there are a few projects that we're working on together. And I mean, because of Dr. Bengio, because of the thriving academic ecosystem here, Montreal is really a growing hub for fundamental research and applied AI solutions, which in turn has attracted a lot of international companies who have set up research labs to get closer to the talent here. And so with these big labs setting up shop in Montreal, it was a very important milestone for us. It was a sign that the talent drain to Silicon Valley was slowing down and potentially reversing. We talk about this brain drain of Canadians going down to the Valley and working. And what we're seeing is a lot more Canadians are choosing to stay in Canada. And so the prominence of the big labs and them setting themselves up in places like Toronto, Edmonton, and in Montreal have lent us a lot of credibility. And so we've seen AI labs from Google, Facebook, Amazon, DeepMind, Samsung, Uber, et cetera, set up labs in Montreal to be closer to the source of talent here. The other thing that we've recognized is that the rate of university graduates won't be sufficient enough to meet all of the demand of all of these labs and these companies setting up in Montreal to take advantage of the AI research. And so one of the things that we've been doing as well is we've been looking internationally for talent, and we spend quite a bit of time recruiting overseas so that we can attract talent into Montreal. I think it certainly helps that we have progressive immigration policies here in Canada, and it's kept the gates open for international talent to come and to stay as well. I think Montreal has been referred to at times as the Paris of North America. And I could say that that's quite true. It's quite, there's certain parts of Montreal that you can find similarities to many cities in Europe. And it's all about diversity. And Element AI as a company, we understand the strength and value that diverse employee bases have in developing more humane, fair, and transparent AI solutions and product. So much so that we published a report last year that tracks the AI talent globally. That talent report can be found online on our site. And the 2020 report will be published online very, very shortly. Just one of the things that we track in the report, and we still recognize, is that women are quite underrepresented in AI. We did a survey of 3 leading AI conferences last year and found that only 12% of the listed authors for accepted papers were women. So still a lot of way to go on that. And there are other interesting statistics in that talent report that will be released very shortly. I know I'm slightly over time, but what I wanted to finish off to say was that Montreal has a multinational cultural heritage, particularly vibrant. 13% of Montreal residents speak English as a first language. 33% are born abroad. And I can say that at Element, the last time we did a poll of the different languages that we spoke, there were at least a couple of dozens, which was pretty neat, that were represented at our company. Montreal is a great place to work and to collaborate. Low cost city when you factor in the currency exchange. We've only got one professional sports team, which is hockey. But very close by is the Toronto Raptors, and I'm angling to get an NBA team in Montreal. Who knows when they go ahead with the expansion. Lots of green space, very healthy and vibrant population, ski hills, lots of trails. The food is fantastic. And there's great opportunity for folks to come and set up shop in Montreal. And so thank you for your time, and looking forward to seeing the Utah-Canada connection come through. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for that great presentation. Really appreciated it. Now we're going to go back to Irene, who's actually going to be Toronto focused now. Go ahead, Irene.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen now for the Toronto one. You can see that, right?
Yes.
Can you see me? Okay, perfect. Oh. So it's not advancing. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I think from a Toronto point of view, I think we have an interesting mix of both manufacturing and technology. So it's almost like a collision zone, and manufacturing has benefited a lot from that in terms of being up-leveled from an automation point of view, as well as AI. And I think this is probably something unique to Canada. I'm not sure about the world, but this concentration of tech and manufacturing. So this is kind of how I view the world, and why we work in Toronto, and why I love working in Toronto with the companies here. I think the rules have changed, and so have the strategies to win. So everybody's working around a smart city infrastructure, and smart cities are driving innovation. Part of that is autonomous vehicles or shuttles, but that's disrupting the automotive sector. And then artificial intelligence is overlaid on top of all of that, in that it's changing how we work, live, and play, and almost everything has AI attached to it right now. And lastly, the fourth industrial revolution has transformed how we do production and how we manage supply chains, in that everything is interconnected. So the successful products of the future have to have both hardware, software, and AI integration. It's impossible to just sell a widget and try to make money at that. Companies that just sell product like that will be obsolete. So understanding how to design products and how to ideate products in hardware, software, and AI, you need to have this mix of manufacturing knowledge, as well as the software and the AI and the digital skills knowledge. The second thing is that product electronification will anchor the new digital economy. So products will have sensors, they will come alive, they will talk to other products. And lastly, leveraging technology convergence and employing smart manufacturing. So I think everything is getting connected. As our smartphone has become sort of the jack of all trades for us, products are becoming platforms with services. So from a Toronto point of view, I see Toronto and Kitchener-Waterloo area as very similar to Silicon Valley and the tech corridors. We have a bit higher population. We have a little bit less in the tech workers, but a really high concentration of tech workers and tech startups, a lot of colleges and universities, a lot of languages spoken. I'm one of those 50% immigrants to Canada, and I'm also trilingual. So I think that's probably the norm in this region as well. And we also collaborate and work together. And I see a lot of this as a kind of a community effort. And here I have 3 cities that work together as an example. Toronto, which is the largest city, over 3 million people. Waterloo, less than 1 million, and Stratford, less than 500,000. So you could see the test bed for driverless car testing starts in Stratford with 5G infrastructure and Wi-Fi. But then Waterloo has the Catalyst 137 incubator for smart cities and IoT. And Toronto has open data and it's Factory 6, which is manufacturing in the city. So things get tested out on a smaller city scale, then they get scaled out, and there's sort of a Catalyst 137 collision space between different technologies and manufacturing, and then gets implemented in a larger city like Toronto. So I like collaborating in this way, and I like the way the cities actually collaborate with each other, and there's really a seamless transition between rural and urban. And again, as I mentioned before, from autonomous vehicles point of view, this really fits really well this geography. And here you can see an example. This is from the Waterloo city, the city of Waterloo and University of Waterloo, of just the companies that are in that area that address the car and autonomous vehicle. And you could see their letter tech on the bottom from Sensor Technology, which is a company based out of Quebec, but also has a location in Ontario near Toronto. Another area which is not as much talked about is the microelectronics industry. And the microelectronics industry in Canada is really a significant part of the telecommunication industry. But what's relevant about that now is really data centers and the need for speed and the need for faster connections. So these are some of the companies in the greater GTA area, as far as Ottawa and Montreal, that work together. What you can see here is large companies like Ciena and Intel, Ericsson, then smaller companies like Teraxion, Fibos, and then universities, colleges, and not-for-profit incubators and accelerators like C2MI in Bromont and Remap, which is my network out of Toronto. And again, here's the space for that. And really connecting the dots is really what I love to do. From a Toronto point of view, I just wanted to give you two examples in terms of supply chain transformation. And this is one of them that I work with is Myant. They have 50 machines for doing textile robotic knitting for garments. So they're basically weaving garments that have electronic sensors in them. They pivoted into making masks. And that's what they're doing on all of these machines right now out of Toronto. One of the things in their supply chain that they were lacking was actually labs to test their masks. So they're churning out 2 to 3 samples a day, and there was no way that could go to a viral lab testing in the US. So we had to find a local lab that can do blood testing and viral testing in Canada. The other example is Starfish Medical, and this is a design company actually out of Vancouver, but they were asked by the Canadian government to make ventilators for COVID-19. And the challenge here was the supply chain, because the supply chain was already tapped for ventilator parts. So what they did is they actually designed a ventilator that did not stress the existing supply chain. So you see here the team touching these old school knobs. That's what they did. They designed an old school ventilator with parts that were available in the supply chain. And I helped them with finding a local contract manufacturer that was able to manufacture this in region. So I think from a connecting the dots point of view, there's some capacity in Toronto, but I think for me the challenge is to find a solution to any problem. And if you do have any questions or you would like to connect with any of the companies in regions, please just let me know and I can do an electronic introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene. Really appreciate that. Okay, so we are moving on now to Jason C., who's working out of Vancouver. He's the executive director of Maple Business Council, British Columbia chapter. In his current role at HQ Headquarters Vancouver, a public-private partnership, Jason works to promote the growth of head offices in BC. He works with a number of industries across various geographic segments that specializes in Southeast Asia, Europe, Japan, Hong Kong, and the Americas. He is on the secondment from the Vancouver Airport Authority. While at YVR, he worked in corporate finance, simplified passenger travel, and most recently in air service development, developing YVR's route network by attracting new carriers to the airport. Go ahead, Jason.
All right, so I'm just gonna share my screen here, hopefully. Can everyone see my screen? So good afternoon from Vancouver, smoky Vancouver, actually. Unfortunately, we're getting a little bit of the wildfire smoke from the west coast here, but great to talk to you today. So I'm actually currently back at the airport now. I'm the manager of the cargo portfolio at the airport. Been with YVR for about 20 years, holding various roles in corporate finance, air service development, innovation, and most recently in cargo. And I did spend a couple of years at HQ Vancouver, which was an investment attraction entity to attract regional head offices to BC and Vancouver. And I also currently sit on the advisory board for, I think, World Trade Center Utah's sister organization, World Trade Center Vancouver, here in BC, and represent Maple Business Council, which is an organization that promotes trade between Canada and Southern California here in BC. So a little bit about the Airport Authority. Like most of the Canadian airports, they're not-for-profit airport authorities, and we, like other airports in Canada, are governed by a locally appointed board of directors. We are the second busiest airport in Canada, so at peak at about 26 million passengers just after Toronto. And we lease the domain in which our land resides on from the federal government. So our current lease goes out to 2072. And one other item about the airport is that we do get ranked by a third-party organization called Skytrax, and we've been fortunate enough to be ranked the best airport in North America for 11 years in a row. So one very fortunate thing that we have at YVR is that we are in a jurisdiction that is very heavily trade focused. So in BC, if we look at over the past 10 years, our trade has grown quite significantly over the last 10 years, and that speaks to not only exposure to the United States, but also by geography, our exposure and trade relations with the Asia Pacific region as well. So in that regard, here's a graphic of our route network, and we really position ourselves as a gateway between Asia and the Americas. And so unfortunately, due to COVID-19, our route network has receded somewhat, but at peak, we had 56 carriers to 126 destinations. As I mentioned, we do focus quite a bit on the Asia Pacific region. In that regard, at peak, we had 188 flights per week to Asia Pacific in 2019. So I focus mostly on the air cargo portfolio, and that has been a positive story since the beginning of the decade. Really since 2010 and outward to our peak in 2018 and then 19. Our growth has really been attributable to wide body capacity growth by Air Canada, as well as many of the Chinese carriers. So we have most of the major Chinese carriers operating at our airport as well. And that's been a real driver of our air cargo growth over the last decade. So in terms of our airport, in terms of air cargo, we focus not only just on local arriving goods and departing goods out of our region and our city, but really look at our catchment areas being Western Canada, the West Coast of the United States, as well as a good part of Western US as well. And a testament to this is a picture here, which we show the truck feeder network, which is quite mature and well diversified in North America. So really within 11 hours is typically the maximum which a truck driver can drive in one day. But depending on the nature of the goods, whether it's perishable or not, you can have a substantial catchment area that reaches out to the Western US, Western Canada, and even in some cases, even to the Midwest or Eastern Canada as well. So what are typically the goods shipped out of YVR? So our focus has traditionally been on the export side. Typically about 70% of what goes outbound is perishables. So a lot of seafood. So crab was probably our #1 commodity on a year-over-year basis. But during certain peaks, we also get a lot of fruit, most notably cherries, and to a lesser extent blueberries as well. And that's supplemented to a lesser extent by some what we call dry goods, equipment and machinery. And then on the import side, it's much more focused on dry goods, more high-end manufactured goods, so electronics, pharmaceuticals, and to a lesser extent perishables as well. So a good example is what I use is really quickly to say what goes out is we have a lot of seafood and cherries going out, and then a lot of things like smartphones and laptops coming in. So consequently, the value of our imports versus exports is typically 2 to 1 in terms of the average value. And so one of the things we're thinking about as we move forward and using as a tool to build our catchment area out through Western Canada as well as the West Coast and Western US is working with our stakeholders like freight forwarders, airlines, to get certification from third parties, in this case IATA, and they do it amongst different commodity types. So in the near term, we're thinking about working with our stakeholders to promote certification, which is really best practices in the fresh space, which is really perishable space, potentially opportunities moving forward beyond that in the farmer space as well, if certain industries such as medical cannabis continue to mature in a positive direction. And then during COVID-19, since about 70% of our cargo actually goes on passenger aircraft, we have felt the impact of that. So year to date, we're down probably about 27% in terms of our cargo volumes. But what we've seen to mitigate the loss of wide body passenger aircraft is actually the use of what we call freighters, which is actually aircraft just being used for cargo only purposes. And so you can see a picture here of Xiamen Airlines, but we've seen a lot of that from Air Canada as well as a lot of the foreign carriers. And as we move into the fall, that continues to be the case, especially with the Chinese carriers and the Taiwanese carriers. It was really a big issue in order to get PPE into North America at the peak of COVID. However, it continues to be an opportunity to mitigate some of the lost air capacity and could potentially be an opportunity in terms of carrying freight for a vaccine solution as we move forward towards the end of the year and into 2021. And so as we look forward in terms of how to build our route network after we recover from COVID-19, is that we want to leverage the fact that Canada's very liberal and progressive in terms of building out free trade agreements. So from my understanding, we have about 51 free trade agreements in different countries, either individually or through different regions like USMCA, CETA with Europe, and most notably the most recently completed CPTPP, which gives us more liberalized trade with most of the Pacific Rim nations. But we sort of identified the big opportunity to be in Southeast Asia, where a lot of the manufacturing from China is migrating to. And so we look at that as a potential opportunity to support potentially a nonstop service into Vietnam or Singapore as an example. And that can be potential opportunities to ship freight from other parts of the Western US, for example, in Utah, via Vancouver as we develop these nonstop services. So that's really the formal presentation I had now. I think we're going to a panel, but open to any other questions at that time.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Jason. We appreciate it. Now we are lucky enough to have Paul Campbell, who is the Honorary Consul of Canada for Utah, representing the Canadian government. He is going to actually moderate the Q&A sessions. Paul currently serves as chairman at Campbell Companies, which comprises a group of businesses focused on mining, energy development, construction, and technology, while overseeing various operations consisting of 29 facilities throughout the West and over 900 associates. In addition, as I mentioned, Paul is the Honorary Consul of Canada for Utah, representing the Canadian government in trade and foreign affairs throughout the state. Paul also served on the board of directors and as national chairman of Associated Equipment Distributors, a construction equipment dealer trade association covering the United States and Canada with over 1,200 member companies. Paul served as president of Utah AED, on the Utah Board of Directors and executive committees for Associated General Contractors and several other boards, including Energy Equipment and Infrastructure Alliance, Busy Inc., which is a mobile labor and asset tracking, Modernus, and Utah Transportation Coalition. Paul is an owner of SciTech Intermountain, which is drone 3D imaging and equipment management for construction and development, Diamond Rental, Monson Engineering, Solutions Financial Services, Nuvia, and current faculty member of the David Eccles School of Business at University of Utah. I can see that he's busy. So we will let Paul go ahead and start the Q&A session. Thanks so much, Paul.
Great, thanks, Courtney. If you have any questions, we have some questions here, but if you have any that come to mind, please put them into the chat function and we'll do our best to get to them. Starting off, maybe Irene, a question for you. You mentioned the superclusters and the north-south orientation within those clusters. How does Utah play into that? And are there particular clusters that are beneficial or lend themselves to doing business, or Utah companies doing business in Canada?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So one of the superclusters I can think of right off the bat is the one based out of Vancouver, which is the digital supercluster, and that's around telecommunications. Microsoft is one of their partners, but they're looking really at digitizing, and they're also using AI as well as looking at manufacturing and digitizing manufacturing. The other one that's, again, from a geographic proximity close to Utah is the protein supercluster, which is out of the Prairie provinces. And that's around agriculture and the food industry, and particularly protein. But again, they're not just focusing on that. They're focusing primarily on the Midwest technologies. They have companies like John Deere in their cluster, as well as food companies and food processing. And then probably, you know, being selfish from Toronto point of view, it's the manufacturing supercluster and advanced manufacturing. And really, I'm excited about that supercluster. I was part of its formation, but it's really around leveraging AI and technology to develop platform industries where you're looking at how to develop steel processing using AI, for example, or how do you develop robotic knitting for textiles using AI or using machine learning. So it's not traditional manufacturing, it's not artisan manufacturing, it's advanced manufacturing. And I think if I were to go further east, you know, Jenny mentioned as well Scale AI and the supply chain supercluster, and that's kind of the session we're in right now, but it's really looking at supply chains and AI applications. And the last one, which is out the East Coast, is the ocean supercluster, which is around water and water testing and sensors and digitization, as well as the fishing industries. So I would say starting on the West Coast with the digital supercluster would be my first choice, and then keep going east.
Okay, great, thank you. So Jason, maybe to you, with the different clusters and the geographic locations, from a logistics standpoint, how easy can someone gain access to, for example, the ocean supercluster on the east coast of Canada from Utah?
Well, to speak when we actually regain our route network, as you can see, we have a fairly extensive route network throughout pretty much most of the major cities in North America, and hope to get back there one day. But we see that really as a real value proposition to having an office location in Vancouver, is having that connectivity to most of the major cities, not just in North America, but increasingly so to most of the major business centers internationally as well.
Okay, great. So maybe as a follow-up to that, you mentioned a little bit with regards to COVID and the impact on transportation and the use of planes now, I think you referred to them as predators. Mm-hmm. What do you see the future of logistics and the impact both from trade wars and also COVID-19? What are kind of the permanent changes in logistics you see going forward?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the last 6 months, we've seen a lot of things happen, which we probably didn't anticipate. One thing I think we have seen is that I'm sure many of you are working from home now, and like myself, I'm like a recently new Amazon Prime member, and I'm getting packages like almost every day. So the whole adoption of online purchasing, I think, has moved forward substantially several years. I was looking at, I think, the April numbers in terms of in Canada, the amount of total retail spend online. It was something like 18% of total spend, which was like 3 times higher than a year ago. And so consequently, we're seeing then a lot of growth in what we call the integrators, the FedEx, UPS, Purelators that operate out of here. And so I think a lot of their development has moved forward at a couple of years. And so some of the innovations that I think they were thinking of, like we even recently just saw Amazon now get approval to move forward with some of their drone development and the use of that technology in a very near-term basis. So I think from that side, we're going to see a lot of different movements and how that looks like, and whether it's drones or reverse logistics, and then I think you're going to see a lot of development in that area in the very near term.
Okay, great, thanks. Maybe Jenny, to you, with the increase in e-commerce and also digitization within the supply chain, how do you see that affecting logistics going forward and 3D printing, things like that?
One of the trends, and Jason had mentioned, is that we're seeing an incredible amount of compression in the amount of volume when it comes to e-commerce transactions over the past 6 months or so. But we're not seeing so much of our customers talking to us about the 3D printing aspect to it. But the types of problems that they're looking to us to help them to solve with AI are quite, I think I mentioned this, but quite boring in nature, and they're automating very simple and manual tasks. And I take this back to the example of one of our customers, and the application is basically applying a model that reads SKU codes and shelf tags onto a robot, and that basically while your distribution center is offline or when your store is closed for the day, having these robots basically go up and down the aisles just counting objects and reading tags within the shelves, which, you know, to a lot of people is not really the sexy kind of AI that they're looking for, but it's really helping to augment the manual labor so that some of these mundane tasks are automated. And you know, what we're seeing with COVID too is that, you know, certain things that were not as high in demand as before, as pre-COVID. I think I remember seeing in the New York Times there was a spike in oranges and frozen orange juice, right? As a result of the quarantine. I mean, things like flour as well, because people are now starting to bake from home. But these types of technologies that are on the ground that help with the automation are very useful in helping to alert retailers of any potential product that is potentially getting to a stage where it's out of stock, so that the replenishment cycle can happen a lot faster. Recognize that there's been a real shift too, and I mean, my Amazon Prime account has been in overdrive over the past 6 months, but we're finding the same type of applications at distribution centers as well.
Great, thanks. Yeah, it brings up a kind of an interesting point with, you know, the shortages that we saw through the whole pandemic, and the impact of just-in-time inventory, or the just-in-time concept. Maybe Irene, and then Jason, and then Jenny, if you could maybe talk a little bit about the future of just-in-time supply chains, and now the need for safety stock, or maybe the advantages of onshoring your supply chain relative to having a long, complex supply chain to provide your resources.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think there's definitely been an impact in terms of what I call the ring score in supply chain, where you have your, you know, 1 day turnaround, immediate proximity, deliveries on a daily basis, and then you have, you know, your 1 week, 1 month, and things that are on a ship versus things that are on a plane. And I think what we've seen over the last 6 months is the ring score has become more important, and the bullseye has become more important. So looking at physical proximity in the supply chain. And maybe the external or the longer lead time ones are sort of backup plans or alternate sourcing. And what happened with the internal, the ring score is that that's your core, that's your critical suppliers, because there have been discontinuities in the supply chain where we cannot build an airplane part because one part is missing, and that part was sourced in a different geography. And I think this has kind of shown us the fragility of our supply chain. So I think the supply chain resilience is very important. I also wanted to say, in terms of the COVID pandemic, is that it's really shifted into two roles and responsibilities from a manufacturing point of view. There's a digital shift and a physical shift. So we're trying to protect as much people working that have to work on the physical shift, that have to operate equipment, but then we're trying to automate as much as possible where we don't need people, to Jenny's point, where we have robots going after hours doing cleaning or doing scanning. And that has also, I think, changed how we replenish stock and how we look at supply chains, in that how much of it can we automate, and how much of it has to still be manually handled, because if a COVID case hits a factory, then it affects the entire factory. So minimizing the amount of people on site per shift is one of the new criteria.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, if I may add there, I think we're sort of on the cusp. Maybe it's a little bit early at this point, but I think we're probably nearing potentially the largest product launch in history, which is the development and delivery of whatever vaccine product comes to market, probably for the next 6 to 12 months. And so I think supply and logistics, supply chains are really going to learn a lot from this. I think there's a lot of question marks still in terms of which proponents are going to move forward and actually get certification, and then consequently when and where they're going to manufacture out of, and that will have a real impact in terms of what mode it's going on. So for instance, if like Moderna is sort of the one that gets certified and can move forward first, traditionally I believe their manufacturing is just outside of Boston. So if it's for Eastern North America, is that mostly via truck, or do they offshore that to India or Israel or something, and consequently then they're going to be need for air capacity to carry those vaccines. So I think there's a big opportunity to learn for something that's really big coming up in the not too distant future.
Great, thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think with a lot of the retailers and grocers that we've been speaking with, they're looking at shoring up their supply from a more localized and regional type model. And with the increase in sort of the mobile pickup, in addition to some of the grocery services, and forgive me, folks in the U.S., I'm not familiar with some of the chains down there, but Grocery Gateway is a very popular one here in Canada, and so some of the interesting problems that we're being asked to help solve is how do we optimize the route that our our grocery delivery drivers take, so that they can maximize the amount of households that they can drop groceries off to. And oh, by the way, can you use AI basically to understand if there's commonalities in baskets, so that we can store perhaps it's keto type ingredients for this particular region in Montreal versus another region who's say more protein heavy, less keto diet. And I think the other thing that we're also speaking to about with some companies is how do you hedge against a disruption in the supply chain using financial instruments? How do you hedge? That's another interesting way that some of our customers are trying to use applications of AI around forecasting to understand what demand is going to look like, so that they can pair that up with the financial instrument to protect against any potential overruns in cost for a particularly large input as part of the value add process.
That brings up an interesting point in that, lots of supply chain follows kind of the low cost path. Jenny, how do you price in risk, for example, where you're dealing with a low cost supplier that now suddenly has tariffs applied to them versus maybe a little bit higher cost, but doing business with Canada in a much better trade agreement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's other incentives that probably add into or should get factored into to that equation. I think one of the things, if it hasn't already been spoken about, is that we're quite generous in terms of the tax credits here in Canada, and in particular in Quebec, and so that could be a way to help to subsidize the potential increase in tariffs, and to offset some of the costs for some of the raw materials coming in as part of your inputs.
Okay, great. Last question to you, Irene. If I'm a Utah manufacturer and I want to look for potential suppliers in Canada, is there a place, a website? Where do I go to find that information?
That's a really good question. I think it would depend on the industry and the grouping, whether it's automotive or aerospace, but pretty much every industry has a very, very strong information database, as well as people that can help. But I would say connecting into somebody in Canada first. And then there's companies, such as Element AI or Tealbook that have huge databases of companies. But I think connecting the dots, we're probably like 6 degrees of separation away from finding the right person.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your answers and your time, and we'll turn it back over to Courtney.
All right, first of all, Paul, thank you so much for moderating. That was really terrific, really informative. Thank you. And Irene and Jason and Jenny, you all did an excellent job. We're so grateful for your time. And thank you again to David for helping to put this whole thing together. And if anyone has any questions on the Utah side, please feel free to contact me directly and I will get you to the right place. And I really hope that you all get in contact so we can move forward and do some business between Canada and Utah. Thanks so much, and we look forward to seeing the rest of you for our technology and entrepreneur final panel discussion coming up shortly. Take care.